Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alana, and on this channel, I pretty much do book reviews with the occasional tag and the occasional haul. So I usually only post once a week, but I am recording this heading into my last week of work for the year. I'm actually going to be off for a little bit over 2 weeks, not going back to work until January 3rd. I like to save my leave to the end of the year and just catch up on some household things or personal things, appointments, whatever it is that I need to do before the new year. And that week of Christmas never ends up as relaxing as you think it's going to be. You're doing some last minute gift stuff or Christmas stuff or whatever. Usually people are in town. It's usually that week after Christmas that's the most relaxing. And so that's why I always take 2 weeks off. Anyway, all that to say, with this extra time off, I'm going to be recording many videos in advance, and I am behind on book reviews. So I'm going to just record and catch up and hopefully record enough video and edit enough video over these next 2 weeks to post twice a week for as long as I can, or as long as I feel like I'm caught up. So one of those videos that I wanted to catch up on was a tag. It is the evolution of the reader tag, and I was tagged by my fellow booktuber Brian, who has a really great YouTube book channel. He's tagged below Bookish at Bookish Texan, and so he tagged me to do this. And I really think that the questions here are interesting, and they are insightful questions that give a lot of background into who the person is that's reading and why perhaps they read the way that they do. So I'm going to hop right in. The first question is, what you read? How has your taste in books evolved? My taste in books has evolved quite a bit. It's still my preferred genre is historical fiction. I was a history major. But so for a period of time when I would recreationally read, the only genre that I would really read was historical fiction. And so even when I was a young reader, I'm talking in the single digits, elementary school age, I was reading like the Dear America series, where if you're unfamiliar with that series, I still have some of those books. They would highlight a particular period in time in American history, let's say the Oregon Trail or the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and it would be a young girl's journal entries. They would typically be that elementary school age, which was the age that they were targeting with those books, and she would have journal entries and her experience as an average girl going through life in these pivotal periods in history. I loved those books. They're actually still some of them are still actually really good. One of my friend's daughters is into that type of thing, and he reached out to me asking for if I knew any books for young people, young girls in particular, and I recommended those, and she loves them. I was also into the American Girl books. Josefina was my favorite. I still have my doll from like the 90s. Now that's considered vintage, and they're selling for a ton of money. But so I was mainly reading historical fiction, and I didn't really deviate that much outside of that. And I would read purely for fun. So I wasn't annotating. I wasn't thinking that critically, because at the time, reading was purely escapism, especially when I was in college. I mean, I was reading some really dense material in college for my degree. And for my subjects, I doubled in history and sociology. So I was reading some really heavy material. I was reading a lot of wars, military tactics as well. My advisor called me the genocide girl because I was not shying away from some of the heaviest material that the history department had to offer. And so when I was reading, I wanted fluffier stuff. Now I will pick up almost any genre. But if something has an appeal to me, I will read it. even if I know I may not necessarily like it, if I know that there's something in that book that I think I'm going to find interesting, I will read it. So that's pretty much how my reading taste has evolved. I went from being almost a sole reader of historical fiction to a reader of almost every genre. I've even incorporated more nonfiction into my recreational reading. I still have trouble with nonfiction. I tend to prefer them as audiobooks because for me, I process the information better, almost like it's a documentary, but that took a long time to answer that question. But yes, that's how my reading has changed. And you can tell by the reviews that I do. I jump from contemporary literature, postmodern, the classics, historical fiction, fantasy. We're going to get into some fantasy in another video. My next video that I'm recording after this is a book haul, and there's quite a bit of fantasy in it. But yes, that is how my reading has evolved. Let's move on because that got long-winded. How do you read? Has the format of your reading changed much? Absolutely. I used to be focused on one book at a time, finish that book, and then move on to the next book. That is how the format of my reading has changed. And I have to attribute that to Bookstagram and Booktube because this is how. So I was actually in a reading slump from 2015 to the end of 2018. I just could not focus on a book. It was taking me a year to get through one book. Maybe I could get through 2 books in a year, but it was taking me a very long time. One reason why is because there's a lot going on between 2015 and 2018. And my focus was just not on reading. I was stressed about various things. When those things got resolved, specifically in 2019, I started reading again in 2018, but the pace really picked up in 2019. I had been not reading for so long. I didn't know that Booktube and Bookstagram were a thing. So when this urge came back to start reading again, I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what I wanted to read. I kind of felt this urge that I wanted to change my reading in a bit. It was almost like it was intuitive. And so I just started searching up book reviews for books that I was just coming across on, say, Amazon or whatever. What I'll do is I'll actually go on Amazon and see books that are trending. I don't do this anymore, but at the time that's what I did. And I would Google them. YouTube would pop up, Bookstagram would pop up, and I would watch reviews. And then then I went down this rabbit hole of all these books. And I was just intrigued by so much that I was like, I have so much reading to catch up on. I've been dormant for 3 years. And so that is how the format of my reading has changed, in that I just got so excited about all of these books that I knew nothing about, that I ended up into my reading routine, reading multiple books at a time. So yeah, I went from a monogamous reader to a polygamous reader. And I always have 3 to 4 physical books on rotation and an audiobook. Another long-winded answer, but that's some background. It's just like the floodgates open, and I was like, I need it all, and I need it all now. Yeah. And again, during that period of when I really wasn't reading much, when the urge to read came back, everything sounded good to me. Everything sounded intriguing. And that's why I ventured into, and it kind of ties back to the first question, that's why I ventured into these genres that I never really read much of, and explored authors and was willing to read from authors that maybe I wouldn't have picked up previously, because that appetite to read came back voraciously. How much do you read? Do you read more or less often than previously? When do you read? Has how often you read changed? So this does definitely tie back into the question I just answered. I read way more than I did previously. Even before I went into that reading slump of 2015, I read way more. I am not a person that sets these massive reading goals like 75 books a year, 100. That is just not feasible for my life. If I personally did not work full-time and then have other hobbies and interests and other things going on, reading is not my life, believe it or not. It's a big part of my life, but I do other things. Maybe I could get to 60. The most I have ever read in a year is like 52 books. But it fluctuates. One year it was 20, and this is post reading slump. One year it was 20 books, and that was fantastic for me. Then it was 50 something. That was 2020 because there was nothing else to do in 2020. And then after last year, it was 32 books. And now this year it's going to be around that 52 mark. My focus has been fantastic this year. I stopped doom scrolling on the internet. That'll do it. So yeah, I read way more, but I don't set a reading goal because I want it to feel organic. I don't want to push towards a number and read just for the sake of pushing towards a number. If I am satisfied with the quality that I've read and it just so happens to be 50, great. If I'm still satisfied with the quality I've read, but it happens to be 20, great. I will say that my reading pace has increased. I am a faster reader than I was last year. I am flying through books in a way, at a pace I've never been able to read before. I equate that to reading some texts that are denser than others. I like to challenge myself with harder to process books. Proust was one. You have to take your time with Proust. I noticed that after I read Proust, my reading pace increased. I was picking up themes and reading faster post Proust. And that was just one book, Swan's Way. Books that used to take me a month to read are now taking me half that time to read. So yes, that has been a big player in me reading probably 52 books this year, and one of the busiest years that I've had thus far in a long time, if not ever. This 2022 has been a busy year for me outside of just work and personal events and functions and all this stuff. It's like everybody came out the woodworks in 2022 to catch up on lost time and have something to do. And it's like, I'm an introvert, people. Hop off my calendar, but whatever. So yeah. When do you read? That's another thing. People think I read a lot, but I mainly only read during my meals. I get most of my reading done during lunch and dinner. Because instead of scrolling on the phone, I prefer to read. Because I'm not going to just stare at a wall and eat. I just headbutted my microphone. I'm not going to just stare at a wall and eat. Typically, people are scrolling on their phones if they're eating. I take a book to work. I read during my lunch breaks. I read during dinner. I do set aside some time between breakfast and lunch on the weekends, if I have the time available. If there's nothing where I have to go or do, nothing that I have to go or do, I will read for longer periods of time, for longer stretches of time. But I read during my meals for the most part. I do read before bed because, again, it's a way for me to get off the phone and get off technology. So yeah, I'm not just sitting around, especially Monday through Friday. I am not sitting around reading for hours at a time. I just don't have the time. I have to go to work. I got to go to ballet. I have other things to do. I still have to cook. I have to eat. I have to clean. So yeah. Has how often you read changed, which is the third question of this particular section. Yes. I guess so. I've always read during my meal times. Even when I was, post Booktube, post Bookstagram, I've always mainly read during my meal times and after, or before bed. So actually, I take that back. The answer to that question is no. How often I've read has not changed. It hasn't. I think I've become a more focused reader and a less distracted reader. Oh, here's the last question. How has Booktube changed you as a reader? I kind of hinted on this already when it comes to the format and do you read more or less than previously? Because I think it's inevitable. When you do Booktube and or Bookstagram, you are going to start reading more because you are connecting with like-minded readers and you are also just inundated with so many reading opportunities and reading materials that you will change as a reader. For me, for the better. I now read books that I never would have picked up because either a bookish friend recommended it to me, and maybe it was a book I knew nothing about, or a publisher has sent me something that I probably would have never thought about if they hadn't sent it to me. I have a bookish friend who works in publishing now. We've connected through Bookstagram, actually. Hi, Haley. And she has sent me 3 books, and all of them have been spot on because she is excellent at what she does, and she's able to look at me as a reader and look at what I talk about and look at how I talk about books and pick out these books that I probably would have never thought about. So that's what's great. Also, has pushed me out. Booktube, Bookstagram has pushed me outside of my reading comfort zones, especially when I first started my Bookstagram back in 2019. I almost used to never read classics. Like I said, I read almost purely historical fiction. And I was heavily intimidated by the classics up to 2019. I had read classics before. I had to read classics in school, but also there were classics that I had read for fun. Jane Eyre, Jane Austen, Dorian Gray. So yes, there were books that I had read for fun that were classics, but I didn't gravitate toward classics. If you were to tell me back in 2015, side note, if you hear music in the background, my neighbor behind me is playing music. I don't know what he is doing back there. He must be having a function, but he has his speakers on. And so now the whole neighborhood's getting a concert. He was on a John Legend kick for like 30 minutes. And I feel like the volume just went up. Now he's playing smooth R&B jams. So if you hear music, it's Connor. His name is not Connor, but that's what I call him. So anyway, if you had told me back in 2015 that I would be reading Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Dickens, I mean, in these 1,000 plus page classics and going through them in like 5 to 6 weeks, I would have thought that you were crazy. So yeah. So it's challenged me as a reader, pushed me outside of my comfort zone. Mainly in 2019 is when I really made an effort to read more classics, and I almost purely read classics at that point. Now I'm very rarely intimidated as a reader. If I want to read something, I will read it. I always say that the book will tell you when to read it. It just hits you like a ton of bricks. That is when I'm almost never. So that's when I'll pick up a book when I get the urge. So I'm just looking down here. Like I have books because I'm going to record a book haul after this. I have a book in particular here that I thought I never would want to read. And now I'm like, I'm almost not scared of any text now at this point. So that is how Booktube has changed me as a reader. I'm a more confident reader. I'm a more analytical reader. I will say, side note, as being an analytical reader, I have had people message me, how are you able to break down books the way you do? Part of that is just through academic training. I've had jobs where I've had to break down and analyze data and look for little golden nuggets here or there. That's just how my brain works. But I have become a more analytical reader because I've come across other highly intelligent analytical readers, and it's almost like one stone is polishing the other. And it's made me a more adventurous reader. So the last prompt, as it says, number 5, tag some people. I'm going to tag three bookish friends who I think would have excellent answers to this. Elizabeth from A Literary Princess, Dia from Novel Idea, and Mike from Mike's Eclectic Reads. I think those 3 would have really interesting answers to this particular tag. I hope you learned a little bit something else about me through this tag. It was pretty straightforward. I probably rambled a lot, but that's what's fun about tags. There's something in my contact. And if you interact with Booktube or Bookstagram, even if you don't maybe create content, but you engage in the comments or whatever, you watch people or consume other people's reading content, has that changed you as a reader? How have you evolved as a reader, especially your younger self versus now? I would love to know. Please feel free to leave me a comment. Please feel free to like, subscribe, And if you would like to, follow me on Instagram where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. And I will see you in the next one.